Christmas Crackers on BBC One.
I really don't think they flew 90 billion light years to come down here and start a fight.
They're using our own satellites against us.
Clock's ticking and so's the bomb.
I'm not going without you.
We gotta stop them!
If the world does go on, it might not go on for everyone.
Iceberg, going ahead!
That's what I call a close encounter.
The water is freezing and there aren't enough boats.
Time's up.
When all else fails, fresh tactics.
Welcome to Earth.
This is so cool.
Enjoy the season of goodwill with the very best films this Christmas on BBC One.
This is BBC One in the West. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Michael Burke and Chris Vasher.
Vauxhall's ending car production at Luton with the loss of 2,000 jobs. After a century making cars, Luton pays the price of change in the industry. President Clinton in Dundalk tonight trying to breathe life into the peace process. Tension across America as the Supreme Court decides on the next president. And air travel in Britain is set to double in the next 20 years.
In the West, dozens of homes at risk of evacuation tonight. Once again, villagers brace themselves against strong winds and rising floodwater. And how art and dance are transforming young lives in the inner city.
Good evening. The British car industry suffered another body blow today with the unexpected announcement that Vauxhall was stopping car production at Luton after 95 years. The decision will mean the loss of 2,000 jobs. Vauxhall's parent company, General Motors, is also cutting jobs in America and in continental Europe. It blames rapidly changing market conditions and the fact that the industry is making more cars than customers want to buy.
This plant seemed the safest in Britain until last Friday, when the message came from Detroit that it would have to close. Too much factory in Europe, not enough sales. Vauxhall executives, as surprised as anyone, digested the news over the weekend, told ministers, then their own workers this evening, before spelling out the reasoning.
For cars that are manufactured here and exported to Europe, and we do export a lot, there is a cost penalty to manufacture them here rather than on the continent if they're going to be sold on the continent due to the level of the pound.
But the Vectra's the real problem, a car that's not taken the market by storm. Customers now prefer smaller cars, leaving the Vectra trailing. A new model destined for Luton will now go to the continent. Luton's the first plant General Motors built in Europe back in 1905. Today has stunned local people.
Bolt out the blue, just can't believe it.
Guys with mortgages and everything else and kids, obviously, it's frightening.
I mean, I'm the only person who owns money for my house, and I think personally for me it'll be a great shock.
But 2 years ago there was doubt over Luton, but it was resolved when unions promised new ways of working, the government promised many millions of pounds, and General Motors promised many millions of dollars to modernise, to build a successor to the Vectra.
There would be at least a medium-term future for the Vauxhall plant, including a new car line. I feel that that's been torn up, and I think that's disgraceful.
There's no logical reason for this plant to be under threat of closure. The British government, the workforce and the unions have reached agreements only a few months ago for new models, and we expect those agreements to be met. Nothing's changed in 3 months.
But it has. A decision in Detroit to tackle mounting European losses, and Ford's decision to close its Dagenham plant seems to have prompted General Motors executives to think similar thoughts. General Motors is losing something like £600 million making cars in Europe each year, and the Luton factory is a casualty of that, but it goes wider. Nissan in Sunderland, BMW in Oxford, Honda in Swindon, all of them are finding that the climate for car making in Britain is getting much, much harsher. Stephen Evans, BBC News, Luton.
The job losses in Luton are part of 10,000 redundancies worldwide announced by General Motors in Detroit. It's the latest set of cuts as the international car makers are forced to respond to the changing global market. GM says today's restructuring is essential to return the company to profitability.
Today, General Motors ditched a part of its history.
Oldsmobile, the oldest car brand in the United States, was axed by GM as part of its global clear-out. It's a relic of the days when cars were expensive to buy and expensive to make. Today it's very different. Cars are no longer luxury items and technology has slashed costs. In some markets, car firms have ended up simply making too many cars of a particular type. General Motors' European operations are losing money. So its decision to end production of the relatively unpopular Vectra at Luton is understandable.
GM Europe's total installed production capacity will be reduced by more than 400,000 units by 2004. These steps, plus others such as GME's plans to significantly reduce material costs, will help return them to profitability.
These days it's fairly easy for car makers to shift production from one country to another. At the same time, in Europe, they're making more vehicles than customers actually want to buy. The upshot is that car making is being concentrated in fewer and fewer places, and the fear is that the United Kingdom is not one of them. In the past 20 years, car making in Britain has expanded rapidly. In 1982, we made less than 1 million cars a year. By 1999, thanks largely to the arrival of Japanese car makers, that had jumped to nearly 2 million. But after cutbacks at Rover, Ford and now Vauxhall, UK output is forecast to fall back to 1.3 million cars a year. It's not all about cutbacks, though. Here at Ryton, near Coventry, Peugeot makes the 206. It's the fastest-selling model in the company's history.
Product does matter because, of course, if you have overcapacity in the business, it's the guys who've got the good product, the sexy product like the 206 at Ryton, who actually succeed. But, of course, in a business which is actually in a reasonably steady state, it's possible to carry an unsuccessful model like the Vectra.
But today the car business is not in a stable condition, and car makers are becoming increasingly ruthless about discarding unsuccessful models and the plants which make them. Greg Wood, BBC News.
Thousands of people have filled the streets of the Irish town of Dundalk to welcome the American President Bill Clinton. The President arrived in the town close to the Northern Ireland border as part of a 3-day tour. He urged the crowd to redouble their efforts for peace and said the past was history, not destiny.
Hero's welcome in Dundalk, a border town with the reputation of being a militant Irish Republican heartland. Some argue that Northern Ireland is President Clinton's only real foreign policy success, but with this kind of welcome, it's obvious why he likes coming here. This was chiefly an economic and aspirational speech. It had been seen as a litmus test of what might come of this visit in hard political terms. But in an area where those who carried out the Omagh bombing, the so-called real IRA, have their base, there was only one reference to that atrocity.
You cannot win by making your neighbor lose. 2 years ago, after the horrid bombing in Omagh, you good people filled these streets. Young people came not wanting to lose their dreams. Older people came because they wanted a chance to live in peace before they rest in peace. You stared violence in the face and said, "No more." You stood up for peace then, and I ask you, stand up for peace today, tomorrow, rest of your lives.
Indeed, there was and is massive opposition here to the bombing, but it was left to the Irish Prime Minister to have harder words for those who still espouse violence.
Peace is a living reality in which few could have thought possible. The people of Ireland treasure peace in every part of the island, and we totally reject that tiny minority who seek to destroy it.
The President's first key talks of the trip were with Mr Ahern at the Irish Parliament on this, his third visit to Ireland. An unprecedented 8-year commitment to one of the most intractable problems in the world. Mr Clinton said reversal in the peace process was not an option. There was also what's become a presidential tradition, a visit to a pub in North Dublin. The First Lady was reminded that she's now a politician in her own right.
Congratulations on your election.
Thank you so much.
There aren't many chances to meet the people, but there's respect and even affection among many for the part Mr Clinton's played.
Summer's gone.
the most familiar of Irish songs to finish, but there are serious problems in the peace process, and unless there's tough talking in Belfast, there may not be much movement this week. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Dublin.
And Nick Witchell is in Dundalk. Nick, extraordinary occasion there tonight, but how do you think the people of Dundalk actually responded to what he had to say?
It was extraordinary, Mike. President Clinton only left here about 10 minutes ago. He spent more than half an hour shaking hands. What I thought was significant, this was a very warm response, a spontaneous reaction from the crowd. Significant that whenever he urged the widening and the deepening of the peace process, the crowd reacted overwhelmingly. Now, of course, this is a crowd which wants peace, which has seen the benefits of political stability. What is critical, of course, is how will those members of the dissident Republican groups, principally the real IRA, listening perhaps in bars not a few hundred yards from here, how will they react? And it must be doubtful that they will succumb to the blandishments both of Mr. Clinton and of Bertie Ahern. They've broken away from the IRA. They've resisted every attempt so far to encourage them to put down their weapons and to join the peace process.
Indeed. I mean, in practical political terms, what difference is all this likely to make to those intractable problems with the peace process, the paramilitaries giving up weapons, the change in the structure of the RUC and so on?
President Clinton has made it clear that he hasn't come here to negotiate the details of the peace process. He simply doesn't have time. He's only got one day now in Northern Ireland when he meets the party leaders there. He only has 5.5 more weeks in the White House. But what he does hope that he can be is a catalyst. He can encourage the leaders on all sides to remember the big picture, to step back from the squabbling and remember what is at stake here. He can't force them into a deal, but he can help and encourage them, he hopes, to face up to those very difficult issues which the two sides still have to resolve.
Nick Witchell, thanks very much. The 9 justices of the Supreme Court in Washington are still deliberating in the case that's expected to decide finally who'll be the next American president. 5 weeks after polling day, the issue at its heart is still whether to allow the hand recounts of the Florida ballots. The decision could come at any time.
The party's over, oh, it's time to hang it up.
The longer the wait, the more bizarre the spectacle. Die-hard Bush and Gore supporters at the Supreme Court.
Who else are you going to blame it on?
Arguing the case outside as the 9 justices wrestle with it inside. Bush supporters confident the ruling will end this election fight.
There'll be a new saying in America. Instead of a sore loser, it'll be a Gore loser.
But I found Gore supporters sticking to the message they've taken through the courts.
I'm still holding out for one count where, every possible vote is counted. I still don't think that's happened. I mean, yeah, you hear the Bush supporters saying we've had 1, 2, 3 counts, but we've never had a count with all the votes yet.
The 9 justices have been deliberating for more than a day. Their last ruling was a 5-4 split, conservatives against liberals in favor of George Bush. So Al Gore, heading to the office today, has to be braced for a legal blow which would finish off his hopes of the White House. But there is still a chance the court will sanction a partial Florida recount.
Florida has not failed to make a choice.
Amid the uncertainty, the Republican-controlled Florida legislature decided to step in. Today, members voted to endorse a Bush slate of electors in Florida as a protection against further vote counting. Democrats were furious.
This isn't about protecting Florida's electors. This is brass knuckles partisan politics at its very worst.
George Bush has been lying low in Texas, his last public appearance yesterday. He's tantalizingly close to the White House, but until America's highest court has its say, he can take nothing for granted. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
And Stephen Sacker is at the Supreme Court now. Stephen, why is it taking the Supreme Court so long? After all this time, what is there to talk about?
Well, Mike, I think they're trying to balance the urgency of this case against the need to get it right, to come up with a rigorous and conclusive ruling that this nation can rally around. And after all, their perspective isn't just tomorrow's morning newspapers, it is the history books. In essence, I think this court does not want to be seen to be divided on straight partisan lines. When they met over the weekend to temporarily stop the hand recount in Florida, it was a 5-4 split decision, Conservatives against Liberals, and I would guess that right now they're trying to find a way of avoiding that 5-4 split, whether it be to come up with a solution in terms of a recount where they impose an objective standard for a new recount of some of the ballots in Florida, which obviously Al Gore would want, or whether it be, and this is perhaps more likely, coming up with a solution whereby some of the Liberals agree with the Conservatives that this election has to be brought to an end and there will be no more recounts. Either way, they don't want this to be seen as partisan.
I thought today, December the 12th, was a deadline in the constitutional process of picking a president, and yet it seems to be slipping by.
You're absolutely right. There seem to have been so many deadlines in this story, and we've missed them all. The 12th was a deadline. Florida was supposed to appoint its electors to the Electoral College today, but the Democrats at least argue the 12th doesn't really matter. It's more of a technical deadline. They point to the 18th, and there is no doubt that the 18th of December is the real deadline, because then the Electoral College meets and the states have to vote for the president. So there's no getting around it. In 6 days' time, Florida has to come up with electors for president, and as things stand, George Bush is going to get those votes unless the Supreme Court intervenes and does activate a new hand recount in Florida.
Stephen Sacker, thanks. Here, the former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, Lord Archer, has appeared in court to plead not guilty to 5 charges, including perjury and perverting the course of justice. The author's accused of asking a friend to lie for him during a libel case he brought against the Daily Star newspaper in 1987. The Abbey National Bank has rejected a second takeover approach from Britain's third largest bank, Lloyds TSB. The Abbey National said its board thought Lloyds' £18.2 billion offer was inadequate. The Environment Agency has issued 9 severe flood warnings this evening. It says the Midlands and Wales are most at risk, with 5 severe warnings on the River Severn between Shrewsbury and Gloucester. Water levels aren't as high as they were a month ago, but the next 48 hours will still be critical. The price of flying from Britain's busiest airports may have to rise to cope with the huge projected increase in air travel. Air traffic is forecast to double in the next 20 years, and the government says raising the cost of flying from busy airports such as Heathrow may encourage people to make more use of smaller regional airports.
This year, the number of people travelling through our airports will reach 170 million. In 20 years' time, the number could have more than doubled. Meeting that forecast would mean building the equivalent of a new Heathrow every 5 years. The government faces huge problems about what to do.
It's a very difficult balancing act that the government has got to strike between the economic benefits of growth in the aviation industry and between the costs that come with that in terms of the costs imposed on congestion on the surface transport system and the environmental and social costs which fall on people within the UK.
Today, the government suggested some options for controlling demand, raising landing charges at congested airports to force flights elsewhere, developing regional airports outside southeast England, and a tax on aviation fuel to reflect the environmental damage caused by aircraft emissions. But the owner of Britain's biggest airports says they must expand or lose out to Europe.
We are very much talking about London competing with Paris, Frankfurt and Amsterdam. So we believe that we should increase capacity, we should do it in a sustainable fashion, and we should try to make sure that the wealth that our airports and industry generate are in fact funneled back into local communities.
But the communities split over the new second runway at Manchester. Some welcome the extra jobs, others have protested against the loss of trees and green fields. East Midlands Airport is another regional success, again at a price. It's doubled in size in 10 years, but that's meant more night flights, more noise.
There are people that live around the UK's airports who already believe that enough's enough. They suffer from noise, local air quality problems, and there really will be a sort of huge public reaction with this scale of growth.
The first test of public reaction will come next year, when the government decides whether to approve plans for a 5th terminal here at Heathrow. And then the really difficult long-term policy for the whole of the UK will have to follow. Simon Montague, BBC News at Heathrow.
A British Airways jumbo jet has overshot the runway at Heathrow Airport. The flight from Boston landed just after 7:30 this evening with more than 100 passengers on board. A spokeswoman for BA said the plane was now stuck in the grass and there were no injuries. It's still unclear why the plane came off the runway, which has now been closed. A head teacher who was cleared on appeal of slapping a 10-year-old pupil is to face a disciplinary hearing by governors at her school in South Wales. Marjorie Evans has been told she'll have to answer further allegations against her. Teaching unions say she's the victim of a witch hunt.
Today's announcement by the local education authority means Marjorie Evans, who's on paid leave from this school in Monmouthshire, will have to face a panel of school governors to consider allegations which were made several months ago. It was in July that Marjorie Evans was convicted of slapping a pupil with special needs at her school. But she appealed and was cleared of assault 2 months later. Despite walking free from court, Mrs. Evans was told she'd remain suspended while police investigated further allegations against her concerning the way pupils had been treated at the school. However, the Crown Prosecution Service has since decided to take no further action, and Mrs. Evans' union says she's now the victim of a witch hunt.
Marge has always refuted any allegation of mistreatment of children. The NUT continues to support her very vigorously, and we will be preparing to support her at the disciplinary. We hope it will take place as soon as possible.
As for Mrs. Evans, she's received a letter of support from Prince Charles, inviting her to meet with him to discuss what he calls her difficult circumstances. The 56-year-old head teacher says she's determined to fight on to clear her name. Gareth Jones, BBC News, Cardiff.
A new watchdog is to bring together regulation of television, radio, telecommunications and the internet for the first time, replacing a clutch of separate regulators. The Office of Communications, or Ofcom, is part of a package of proposals on the media and communications industry from the government today.
Home Choice in London is a pay TV service with a difference. It comes down an ordinary phone line. The old distinctions between broadcasting and telecommunications are breaking down. So the government wants to overhaul the alphabet soup of regulators responsible for the two industries, issuing licenses, drawing up guidelines and handling complaints from the public. In future, they'll be combined into a single body dubbed Ofcom, a move broadly welcomed by the opposition and the existing regulators.
The broad thrust to deregulate, to create a single regulatory body, to simplify the structures, quite happy with that. I just wish they'd get on with it.
The Independent Television Commission said there was less need for detailed regulation when there were more companies competing with one another, but Ofcom would be able to crack the whip.
We also welcome bringing the regulators together to create a powerful body when it's needed to face big companies, sometimes multinational companies, when you do need to intervene to protect consumers and in the public interest.
The BBC governors are happy because the White Paper doesn't recommend they lose many of their powers to the new Ofcom, as they'd feared.
It contains sensible proposals which maintain the independence of the modern BBC within a common regulatory framework. It also emphasises the continuing importance of public service broadcasting in a changing and increasingly competitive environment.
One consumer watchdog was disappointed the BBC's still largely outside Ofcom's control.
The doors have been opened, but not as wide as we would like them to be. Our view is that it makes no sense for consumers any longer to see the BBC regulated separately from the rest of the public service broadcasting environment.
But there will be a new consumer panel to represent the interests of viewers, listeners and phone users.
What it's there to do is reflect the views of consumers, of citizens, of customers in a variety of different ways, including very much what sort of programmes, how those programmes are being put together, whether content standards are falling.
The White Paper leaves out a lot. For instance, the thorny question of changing the rules on media ownership has been put off till after the election. But the government's hope is that viewers and listeners should notice little difference. Nick Hyam, BBC News.
Football, and in tonight's Worthington Cup quarter-finals, Birmingham beat Sheffield Wednesday 2-0. The match at Selhurst Park between Crystal Palace and Sunderland was postponed shortly before kick-off because of a waterlogged pitch. And the weather also forced the abandonment of Manchester City's game against Ipswich in the first half, with the score at 1-1. England's cricketers have arrived home from their Test series victory in Pakistan. England are the first visiting side ever to beat Pakistan in Karachi. The captain, Nasser Hussain, said the success was all down to team spirit.
The England captain was delayed at Heathrow this morning because they'd lost one of his suitcases. But he did come through with a smile and one extra piece of luggage, the trophy for England's series win over Pakistan. A trophy which 10 weeks ago when the tour started, virtually nobody predicted England could possibly win. It was a very sweet achievement.
To go out to Pakistan after 13 years and to win like that is just phenomenal, and usually I'm playing down what we do. But on this occasion that was something special, and I think whoever was in that squad, from our physio to our captain, had been out there, they'd have been punching the air in delight because we'd worked so hard for it.
That's through, that's an inside edge, this could be it.
The historic win came in near darkness, the final day of the final test, and the first time Pakistan have ever been beaten at their headquarters, Karachi. Jubilation in an England dressing room with newfound purpose.
There are some very good things going on in our dressing room. We got a very fine coach in Duncan Fletcher, we got good backroom staff, and we got some good players, and we're showing consistency in selection, and everyone just wanting to do well.
England can savour this victory for a while, but they know their true measure will come against the best in the world, Australia, in the Ashes series next summer. Adam Minot, BBC News, Heathrow Airport.
OK, it's 25 past 10. I'll be back a little later with the latest on the day's headlines. But now, the news where you are.
Good evening from Points West. There are severe flood warnings in place tonight for the River Severn throughout the whole of Gloucestershire. In parts of Somerset, homes have already been evacuated, and the Environment Agency is warning that another 75 could be underwater within days.
It is a village under siege from millions of gallons of water, inching closer by the hour.
We received a telephone call to say...
Children arrived at the village primary school this morning only to be told an hour later they were going home on orders of the local education authority.
It's been quite difficult getting hold of parents. I mean, in fact, they'd only just dropped the children off, and an hour later we were trying to get them all back to take the children home. So it has been quite difficult and, yeah, a bit confusing, really. Yesterday you could see a mount of green.
With the rain continuing to fall, there is a sense of inevitability here. Many believe it's not a question of if, rather when their homes will be flooded. Taking everything of value upstairs would seem a prudent precaution.
We've been told that there seems to be a risk of flooding, but they won't actually say, they're not actually committing themselves as to what that risk is, in something between 3 and 5 days, something like that. But I've got to admit that looking outside at the way the water's rising, that sounds a little bit of a generous estimate.
This evening, as more rain fell, the Environment Agency revised its predictions.
Well, the latest information I have is that the most vulnerable properties could be affected within 24 hours.
So it's getting closer?
It's getting closer, yes, that's right. The latest level in the moor is 4.62, and the rate of rise has gone up to about 7 millimetres an hour during the course of the day. Obviously, this rain coming in is not going to help the situation.
The water is getting deeper and closer. For the people of Moorland, a bad situation is getting worse by the minute. Evacuation could come sooner rather than later. Clinton Rogers, BBC Points West, on the Somerset levels.
In other news tonight, the Christmas post is under threat again, this time thanks to a dispute in Somerset. Workers at the Royal Mail sorting office in Bridgwater are threatening to stage a walkout over pay. It could go ahead on Thursday, December the 21st, the last posting date for first-class Christmas mail. Shopkeepers in Swindon have got together and banned 6 known shoplifters from 27 stores in the town centre. All have been served with exclusion notices. If they enter any of the shops, they'll be treated as trespassers and could be removed by the police. Frenchay Hospital near Bristol is sending a breast scanning machine to help treat the victims of the Chernobyl disaster. It's 14 years since the world's worst nuclear accident, but local people continue to suffer the effects.
Around 70% of the radioactive cloud from this nuclear power station was blown over Belarus. Twice a year, the Kingsway Aid Project, based in Bristol, gives humanitarian aid packages to a town called Marina Gorka in the former Soviet state. Here the incidence of breast cancer is very high, primarily because of the disaster. Although there is scanning equipment available in Minsk, the capital, demand for it can't be met. That's why this ultrasound scanner, which has been replaced by a newer model, is being sent there. The £15,000 piece of equipment's been donated by the charity Bust.
The equipment should arrive in Belarus for Christmas, the best present anyone there could hope for. It's also hoped that this will be the first dispatch of many medical consignments that are so badly needed. Matthew Hill, BBC Points West, Bristol.
In football, the game between Yeovil Town and Hereford United was postponed due to flooding in Hereford. But Bristol City's game against Brentford did go ahead at Ashton Gate. Some City fans may be wishing it hadn't, as they lost 2-1.
City slipped to their first defeat in the league since the 9th of September as Brentford came from behind to steal the points. Lee Peacock's 32nd minute goal had put City ahead, but Gavin Mohan had equalised with the visitors' first shot 4 minutes from half-time. After Scott Murray had had a goal controversially ruled out for offside, former City man Scott Partridge side-footed home Brentford's winner 4 minutes from time.
Finally, a group of schoolchildren from inner city Bristol are learning this week that they really can achieve what they want in life if they have the confidence to believe in themselves. And they're learning it through art and dance.
These are the children having to work hardest to reach the government's targets in spelling and sums and science. But today, at the Create Centre in Bristol, they were learning something different. That their artwork is worth something too. Worth displaying, worth talking about.
First, we got a piece of paper and someone drawed around us, and then we put our features on.
A 1,000 children were involved, professional artists helped them out, and the result?
I used to think it wasn't very good, but now other people think it's good as well. I think it's fantastic, and I'm very shocked.
What would you say to someone who says these children shouldn't be doing this artwork, they should be concentrating on their spelling and their sums?
Well, obviously, in order to be better at spelling and sums, you need to actually know how you're learning, you need to know how you're thinking, and you need to actually feel as though you want to achieve. Once that's in place, I think that a child will take the steps to explore and take learning as an adventure that they can be in control of, rather than have imposed upon them.
It makes me feel very confident on what I like doing in art.
More confident than you were?
Yeah.
The exhibition at the Create Centre closes at lunchtime tomorrow. The artists are hoping you'll be able to pay a visit. John Young, BBC Points West, Bristol.
That's all from Points West this evening. There's a full weather forecast in a moment, but now it's back to Michael Burke in London.
The main news again tonight, the British car industry has suffered another major blow with the announcement that after a century making cars, Vauxhall is to stop car production at Luton with the loss of 2,000 jobs. Vauxhall's parent company blames rapidly changing market conditions. President Clinton in Ireland has told a crowd of thousands in the small border town of Dundalk to redouble their efforts for peace. And America awaits a crucial decision from the US Supreme Court on the case that will finally decide who's to be the next president. Newsnight starting now over on BBC Two, but from the 10 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening. Our persistent wet weather has continued today. A miserable day out and about. The active weather front brought a mini tornado to Newton Aycliffe earlier this evening. It's been very wet in most parts of the British Isles today, though. This cloud steamed its way northwards, bringing another inch or more of rain. And we've some strong winds to contend with in the next few hours. You can see how tightly packed the isobars are, and even that, though that moves out towards Scandinavia by tomorrow, it'll still be driving our weather systems in. It'll bring further showers in on that west or northwest wind. But the wind is the main problem for the rest of the night, I think. Of course, we've had the rain, but for much of England and Wales, we could see some damaging gusts of wind at west to southwesterly 70 or 80 miles an hour. Some very hazardous driving conditions indeed. And that's all to the south of this area of low pressure, so you can see how the winds change through the night. A strong northwesterly picking up around the Manchester region, Northern Ireland, later western Scotland, and then perhaps by the end of the night some very strong winds across the eastern side of northern England. But we still have some rain to contend with as well. As much as a couple of inches of rain has fallen over the hills through the course of Tuesday, and even once the main rain band is clearing, we're seeing plenty of heavy showers following. But the main rain band should clear away from Scotland through the rest of this evening and overnight. Some sleet and snow possible before it does clear, and there'll be plenty of showers packing in behind. Just to compound the flood problem that we have at the moment, around a dozen severe flood warnings out for England and Wales, and the floodline number once again is 0845 988 1188. So it's not going to be a particularly cold end to the night, but it is going to be a windy start to Wednesday. But at least the rain will be punctuated by some sunny spells tomorrow. I think the showers certainly quite prevalent across northern Scotland, sleet and snow over the higher ground. But the showers could gang up from time to time further south, so some longer spells of rain with hail, with thunder, and still a gusty wind. Gusts up to around about 50 miles an hour through the course of Wednesday, which means for most of us it will feel a good deal cooler and fresher than it has felt today. And by Thursday it'll be cooler still as the winds swing into a more northerly direction, which means that some of these showers will fall as sleet and snow even at lower levels across northern Scotland by the end of the day. Otherwise it will feel cooler further south, and by Friday we'll start with a fairly widespread frost, but hopefully a more settled day under this ridge of high pressure. Good evening.
From fish porter's son to multi-millionaire Hollywood star.
An extremely rare degree of talent.
The face of 60s cool.
For an actor of my generation, Michael Caine is just a complete hero.
A career spanning 4 decades and over 80 films.
One of the preeminent screen actors of my generation.
Double Academy Award winner and Knight of the Realm. The BBC and BAFTA tribute to Michael Caine. Monday, 10:35 on BBC One.
And Barry Norman pays tribute to Michael Caine in the new Radio Times, which also has listings for all major television channels.
What do you see? What do you hear? What do you know? Things aren't always what they seem. For the complete picture, your call counts. Crime Watch UK, tomorrow at 9:05 on BBC One.
It's Faces of Islam at 11:25 on BBC One, after every man meets people who say they've seen an angel.
Jose Carreras, Placido Domingo and Luciano Pavarotti singing Jingle Bells. The Three Tenors Christmas, Saturday at 9 on BBC Two.
A mother fights to prove her innocence in the film drama Falsely Accused, here on BBC One in a few minutes, after the weather with Helen Willits.
Hello and welcome to Weatherview. Across England and Wales there's a stormy few hours ahead of us, but let's take a look further afield first. A couple of days ago we saw an end of a 30-year drought in Iran with some snowfall over the Zagros Mountains, and you can see the system that brought that rain and snow sweeping its way eastwards. There could be further showers in the next couple of days as well. But the story across the United States is of cold weather, and that cold weather is going to stay across many parts away from southern states through the rest of the week, and we've another snowstorm to come up towards the Great Lakes and Chicago during Wednesday, although that should blow out into the Atlantic by Thursday. Now as we cross the Atlantic, it's been pretty mild across the British Isles during Monday night, record-breaking temperatures at London Heathrow, but we have got a colder snap on the cards later in the week. You can see how the frost seeps its way southwards. As we lose these mild southwesterly winds, we pick up more of a northerly by Thursday and Friday. True polar air, as you can see from the blues, But the cold snap short-lived, I'm afraid, because the southerly winds return towards the weekend. And those southerly winds have been piling in the cloud and the rain through the course of Tuesday. A thoroughly miserable, wet and quite windy day for many parts, and this is the reason. It's an area of low pressure, and it's quite tightly packed isobars as well, giving the very stormy weather through the course of the night. Now that slips away towards Scandinavia, although it's still going to drive our weather. We'll see showers swinging around that area of low pressure during Wednesday and into Thursday, but by then the winds start to come in from a more northerly direction, so some sleet and snow, possibly even at lower levels. Just the hint of some drier weather though by Friday under a ridge of high pressure. But the situation is serious. We still have several severe flood warnings out across England and Wales, and you can get more details from CFAX page 419. The floodline number 08459 88 11 88, and we've still got the rain to come down from the mountains after Tuesday's rain. In fact, some very active showers crossed the northeast of England through Tuesday evening, a mini tornado not far from Newton Aycliffe, and we've got some very strong winds to come from many parts of England and Wales through the remainder of the night, particularly in southern and western coast, the gusts up to 70 or 80 miles an hour, which could cause some minor damage, giving some very hazardous driving conditions. It's all to the south of this area of low pressure, which will give some pretty strong winds through Northern Ireland and western Scotland later in the night as well, but they'll push the main rain band away, although that's not to say there won't be a fair number of beefy showers following it in behind, even the odd thunderstorm here and there. So it's not going to be a particularly cold end to the night. Then for Wednesday, the showers will be punctuated by a little bit of sunshine, some drier weather as well, but there'll be rather a lot of showers, particularly for northern Scotland, sleet and snow over the hills, and some hail and thunder in the showers further south as well. The wind will continue quite blustery, gusts up to around 50 miles an hour, and it will be a cooler, fresher day for most of us. And that's the forecast. Bye-bye.
Leaving here is going to be like ending a relationship, and there's going to be tears, I can assure you.
As the year draws to an end,
daily life has been calm, peaceful and fun.
Some look back in anger.
It's a horrible feeling when you don't get on with somebody.
We'll just leave it as it is, mate. I don't want to speak.
Whilst others found their island paradise.
It's like we've caught the love bug or something, to have all these couples running around.
Castaway, Heaven and Hell.
I love it here. I absolutely love it.
Monday at 9 on BBC One.
Now on BBC One, film drama based on the true story of a mother falsely accused.